I definitely agree with the basic notion that energy resources should be addressed from a global perspective. What I was trying to consider in my presentation is that what is a sort of a plausible, viable way of politicization, a way that these issues can become addressed on a global level. And I believe that a more wider understanding of stability and security is the only way that this can happen in the current political climate, because the main motives, main things that motivate policy in the world are either economics or security and stability. The latter ones are exemplified by armies and, for example, insurance companies and other very powerful institutions. And they have sort of a reason for existence of thinking things from other perspectives rather than strictly economics. But right now, security and stability are being thought in a way that is still dominated by the current economic model. So I think that the change in the viewpoint on stability and security is one way of politicizing that can even start to reach that kind of global perspective. If I'll try to give a more philosophical, even more general answer, high moral ideas rarely in themselves start large-scale political changes. They are always a big part in those changes, but high moral ideals are only realized in a world that can support them. That we have to find ways of making politics where ideas like that have a chance of living.
If I may continue, because actually I tried to answer both of the questions at once, and if you look at it from a legal point of view, which I'm not an expert to say something, but I know a little bit about it, and it's if you think of from the legal point of view, it's the United Nations Law of the Seas that says, and it was decided already, I think during the 70s already, that these coastal countries have the right to enjoy these riches of the Arctic, and that's something that if we abide to the UN laws, we cannot do anything about. But of course, it's a moral issue that, and there is inside this legislation there are clauses that say that part of the resources should be left for example, there's this 5 or 10 year rule. Maybe you know better, but that when a country, for example, Russia says, I want to use these oil resources, they have 5 to 10 years time to start using it, and after that, part of those resources should be open for the global community to also engage in developing those resources. How, I don't know, but there, in a way, legally there are possibilities to in a way circumvent this, that it's only the coastal states. But I think it's definitely, as Ville said, that it's a moral issue, that how these resources are going to be used, and to your question concerning the future of these people in the Arctic, it's of course, I see in a way the only way that we can in a way change the situation. I think you're thinking on a very very meta level that we need a change in the way the economy works. But I would tend to think much more pragmatically, in the sense that we the consumers of, for example, most of Russian oil, it's consumed here. It's consumed in the EU. For example, 90% of Finnish oil comes from Russia, and people, when they go to the gasoline station, do they know where this oil comes from, how it's produced, what kind of environmental effects does it affect, what kind of social effects? You know, this kind of pressure towards, for example, Lukoil, that is a Russian company that owns Finnish Steb oil. How many Finnish people, when they tank their or gas their car, do they know how this gasoline is produced? Very little. We know how our bananas and cucumbers are produced, but we don't know. We know very little about this, how hydrocarbons are produced. So in a way, it's a issue of also knowledge about how energy is produced, and why this pressure towards these companies that function in the regions. And of course there are examples. For example, Gazprom in Yamal region, they are engaging in social responsibility programs that address these locations, as I explained in my presentation. These locations.
They don't follow these programs. They have beautiful programs. They never follow them.
Yeah.
They let the people just, I don't say die, but.
One procedural
Okay,
thing.
but we'll continue. Maybe you continue.
Actually discuss the indigenous people of the Arctic in the afternoon, and unfortunately Pauli Fedorov will only speak via Skype. But we have here also Tero Mustonen, who is speaking in the afternoon, and he's very familiar with the human dimension. So, Tero, would you mind joining us here?
Right now?
Yeah, right now. Just and well,
You want to continue with the question?
Okay. Yes. Thanks. Well, I think the idea of this world capital or maybe with the idea of having a moratorium in the Arctic Ocean for exploitation of natural resources and so on. Thinking about the views of the coastal states, I think they are really non-starters. The question is the market economy, and this certainly will guide what will happen. The decision by the coastal states, and if you look at the strategies of the coastal states, particularly Russia and Canada, the number one principle there is the sovereignty. So this is the platform. They clearly establish that they are the ones who decide what happens to the resources under their jurisdiction, which is the 97% of the resources are under their jurisdiction already. So the question is that the incidents like the Gulf of Mexico certainly has had an effect to the let's say the timeline there and the speed of working there. Also the shale gas phenomena and so on. The market prices of the energy have had an effect. So there is a sort of a timeout period at the moment. For Russia, if you think that 91% of their gas resources and 43% of their oil resources are in their Arctic, so this is a strategic priority for them. That's very clear. They are not exploited that well. Offshore activities are just starting, perhaps. But the Yamal Peninsula is the key, and if you go to Salehat, it's a modern city, everything clean, everything fine, and so on. You can see what the money brings to the development if you compare to Murmansk or other areas there. Unfortunately, now the question on people. I mean, the Arctic Center Rovaniemi has done quite important cooperation with, particularly with Yamal, with Nenetsi people there on the issue of exploiting the resources, particularly regarding issues like the reindeer herding and the pipelines, how they can be reconciled, and there is also the declaration on the indigenous peoples and oil and gas production in Russia. So yes, well, I don't go into the implementation phase, but there are the instruments are there, and the Ripon issue was a big issue last months. So far, it seems to be solved by them amending their own basic papers in a way that they consult with the constitution of Russia, and they are allowed to continue now. The suspension is not there anymore. They also made some changes in their leadership and so on. So we are expecting Ripon to be with us in the Arctic Council meetings. After all, it's the founding institution of the indigenous peoples, and it's also the comprising the whole, indigenous peoples in Russia. It's the biggest area and biggest participation. So without them, I think it would be quite inconceivable to see to keep on working. And finally, I was surprised personally at hearing the governor of the Yamalo-Nenetsi Kapulkin speaking. He spoke very, very strongly and warmly about the indigenous peoples there. So okay, we can say whether this is just a political speech, but that's the first step.
I have made interviews with him many times, but he does not mean what he says. He can use the beautiful words, but is Finland like listening these words without critics? It's my question.
Let's introduce our speaker of the afternoon. And I propose actually, because we have reserved 10 minutes for the discussion in the afternoon after Tero Mustonen and Paulina Fedorov, would it be okay that we postpone the coffee by 10 minutes now? And we have the discussion here while everybody who is present is on the stage. Is that okay?
We
10 past 4. 20 minutes of discussion now.
10 minutes. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
Is that okay? Okay. So, short introduction. Dr. Tero Mustonen is the coordinator of the traditional knowledge in the Arctic biodiversity assessment, which will come out shortly for the ministerial meeting of the Arctic Council. And he has worked like 15 years all over the Arctic area with the Arctic indigenous people, with climate change and biodiversity issues, and indigenous people's rights. So I guess he can now jump into the discussion also here. So welcome, Tero.
Thank you, Jenny. Distinguished other speakers. Thank you for having me here. It was quite sudden, but I think we have, in the case or context of indigenous peoples in the Arctic, we have a range of contexts. A lot of the things that Kirsikka was identifying for Russia are true. We are just compiling something called the Arctic Resilience Report for the Arctic Council, and the first opening statement of the chapter regarding Eurasian indigenous peoples states that they are in a profound state of shock and crisis. Now, on the other hand, some of the Alaskan groups, as well as the Canadian Inuits and Gwich'in and others, are, shall we say, in a different position regarding their legal rights to their lands and waters. So we have a wide range of context for the indigenous communities in the Arctic. What you should keep in mind is that there's over 40, depends on the number how you define them, but there's over 40 different nations in the Arctic that can be called indigenous peoples. Now, I would side with Kirsikka on a lot of the points she raised, because we have seen on the ground a shift from partial recognition of rights in the Russian Arctic and in the Finnish Arctic towards a full erosion of rights in the past 10 years. And all of this takes context also in the time and sort of larger frame of the increased transport, natural resources and oil and gas interest in the Arctic. We are not seeing any meaningful progress on indigenous rights, for example, in Finland. Instead, they are being eroded as we are speaking. However, I would argue that the most severe and urgent threat to the indigenous communities in Siberia and the Fenno-Scandian Arctic is mining. Of course, these are linked because it's natural resources production and it's fueled by this climate change and so on. But if we are looking at the way, the speed and the environmental capacity of national authorities to monitor mining and recognize indigenous rights to land and waters, it's a hopeless context. So yes, Kirsikka is precisely right in identifying that the lip service that's being paid to the rights and support for the indigenous cultures transforms into a very stark and desperate situation on the ground. I can give you some specific examples, but that's the big frame right now for Russia and Finland. Thank you.
If I may continue just briefly, because I actually didn't develop my argument so well concerning Kirsikka's question. But I think the issue with this social responsibility is that we see some progress. We see some progress in those locations where this oil and gas is being produced in Russia. And of course, that is greenwashing or whatever you want to call it. But it's a progress. But the thing is, what makes it interesting from the viewpoint of how, for example, these territories in general will be developed in the future, is what kind of deals these companies have with the state. So do we see this kind of philanthropic development that these companies, they are responsible only for those communities more or less where the oil and gas is being produced, and not the bordering or other communities that are in the region? And this is, of course, in a way, I think the broader picture that we should concentrate on, not only looking at how, in a way, of course there are bad developments in this region, that's for sure. But in a way, to be constructive in this way, of course we have to criticize what they're doing, but we should also, in a way, think that what they have done well in those locations, since at least some of the social responsibility programs have been doing some progress.
Well, I just wanted to mention that additionally what is in the Finnish constitution and the government program and so on the Sami question, we are now quite actively discussing for our Arctic strategy how to approach this issue. We have quite a substantial contribution from the Sami parliament, from the communities in the north, from the reindeer herders association and so on. So in which way they will be reflected in the strategy is too early to say now, because it's just receiving these issues. But I can only say that they certainly are taken into account on the viewpoints. The strategy, the strategy which is valid now, it's very much a foreign relations oriented, and that's the international perspective there. But the new strategy is attempting to cover the whole society, the all ministries, governments, and so on. So in that sense, it's a joint effort, and like the issues regarding the Sami, they will comprise a lot of different sectors. So that means they have to take into that context. There are legal issues, and there are ownership issues, the traditional knowledge, how to put it together with this high expertise. It's very interesting discussion also that how we can do this. However, in the Arctic Council also when discussing the natural resources and the indigenous peoples there, it's usually the indigenous people are not against exploiting natural resources, but the point is really in which way to do it and how they can benefit. They need to be a shareholder there. I mean, it cannot go over the heads of the indigenous peoples. And having said that, it's also important to remember that in those regions, it's not only indigenous peoples living there. There are only other people living and making a living there and their position and employment and well-being has to be taken into account also at the same time.
Yes, certainly. I guess we are somehow at the core of the issues, the different aspects of sustainable development, and also when we think about like the post 2015 and the so-called Sustainable Development Goals. This is an interesting discussion in a way, because now we are looking at universal goals instead of like Millennium Development Goals, which were posed from developed countries to developing countries. And if we like really look at universal goals and the way that we have to look at our consumption and production, and also the difficult issues such as land issues and the natural resources use in the north. I guess the Arctic provides a prime example for this kind of demands that we have to solve different aspects. But yeah, I guess we can go on this same discussion. Tero wanted to comment, and then there was a question in the audience as well.
Yeah, just very quickly. It's true that what Ambassador Halinen said about recognizing indigenous knowledge in various assessments of the Arctic Council, and I'm happy to hear that the new strategic view will include the Sami and the reindeer herders. But I have to be very honest here too, in the sense that Finland plays with two sets of cards. One with the international set of cards and one domestic. We have seen in the past year and a half Supreme Court decisions which erode the status of who is Sami person. We have seen the erosion of discussion regarding the land and water rights. We are now seeing the, I like to call it the invasion, but shall we say, increased interest of mining companies just outside the so-called Sami home region, and the dissolution of, for example, the Pokka Commission decisions on or discussions on land rights from 1990s. So it's a very, very stark difference between the situation on the ground and the international politics and the commitments that Finland has regarding declaration of indigenous peoples at the UN. And that's why we have the responsibility here in Finland to start our discussions. There's a lot that could be said about Russia, and yes, the progress on Yamal has had some benefits. Yes, some of the indigenous communities in the Arctic are in favor of opening up oil and gas in those contexts, very often where land and water rights have been secured. There's many models from Alaska and Canada to do that, but the responsibility here has to start from Finland. And I want to be very clear. Finland plays with two sets of cards, one for international UN and Arctic Council audiences, and one for domestic context where there are no rights which are significant to the lands and waters and to the self-governance at the moment. Now, where will this go? I look forward to the dialogue with Ambassador Halinen and other colleagues in the Arctic Council when we are releasing the Arctic Biodiversity Assessment 15th of May. I was one of the lead authors for this 5-year assessment on this particular topic, and I'm sure that the dialogue will continue. Thank you.
Okay. Let's take